Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Lynn Cancer Institute updates. We're trying to keep you in the know in 2024. We're very grateful to have you all with us today and to learn from our very own oncology clinical dietitian, Brandy Hyatt. Brandy will be educating us today on sustainability in nutrition and gardening, a very hot topic these days. At the Lynn Cancer Institute, we believe that nutrition is the basis of healthy living for our patients and survivors, and as well as prevention for all of us. During Brandy's presentation, your Zoom will be muted, and in the interest of time, her bio was sent to you by email. We invite you to please take notes, and when you have a question, please put it in the chat box or in the Q&A box, as Brandy will not be able to see or hear you during her presentation. And at the conclusion, she will have time to answer any questions. We're very happy again to welcome you to the Lynn Cancer Institute and to introduce Brandy Hyatt, oncology clinical dietitian. Welcome, Brandy.
Thank you, Jan, and good morning, everybody. Like Jan said, my name is Brandy Hyatt. I'm one of the registered dietitians here at the Lynn Cancer Institute. Today, because we are still honoring National Nutrition Month, we are going to be discussing Beyond the Table, and we're going to dive into sustainability and nutrition and gardening. My purpose here today is to provide bite-sized takeaways of what we can all do to make a difference in global sustainability. So we will be exploring sustainability and nutrition, eating with the environment in mind, a little bit of gardening, and Beyond the Table, which is our National Nutrition Month theme again. So starting out with sustainability and nutrition, hard to say, try to repeat that 5 times. Sustainability is a vast topic, and it's taken me a good month to really try to really break down all of the information and articles and research that are out there. It is such a timely topic, but it is so vast. And I don't know that today we will have all of the answers with this presentation as far as how it relates to what we can do. But my goal is to provide education on the changes that can be made and just the issues at large, especially where it concerns nutrition. So what I'm really going to be focusing on is what is affected now, what will be affected, and how can we as individuals make some changes that are meaningful. So starting out, I think this was a good place to start because we really need to know what the definition of sustainability is. So sustainability development meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So we're really looking at making sure that we're nourished, that we're not really damaging the environment now so that we can provide a really good foundation for our future generations as well, and for ourselves as we age. What does sustainability mean for nutrition? So when we break down the sustainability, again, we're looking at our takeaway, which is meeting the needs now as well as meeting the needs in the future. So we really break down the sustainable diets. And what does that mean? So a sustainable diet are those diets with low environmental impact. They contribute to food security, okay, and to healthy life for present and future generations. So sustainable diets, breaking down a little bit more, are protective and respectful of biodiversity and ecosystems. So we're trying to minimize the rainforest deforestation. Okay, we know that by taking away a lot of the trees, we're really getting rid of a lot of the natural ecosystems that are present. We're being respectful for not polluting our waters and, worried about our air quality, all of these things that are really affecting the diversity of our different ecosystems. We also want to be mindful of culturally acceptable. So we are not going to want to introduce a whole bunch of foreign foods to different cultures just because they're inexpensive. We want to make sure that we're still towing the line and providing and so that a culture can maintain their history and their past as far as their history with their foods that they're used to. We also want to make sure that sustainable diets, in order to continue them through the future, that they're accessible, they're economically fair and affordable, they're nutrient dense, they're safe and healthy. Okay, so we're not, incorporating a lot of different microorganisms into some of the way that we're farming or we're harvesting. And then while optimizing, we really want to optimize our natural resources. So again, we don't want to take away all the trees and pollute the water. We really want to make sure that we're really mindful and respectful in order to continue to have a sustainable diet. Overall, I mean, who cares? Like, why is sustainability important? Like, why should we even care that we need to do this or focus on it or even really talk about it? Well, it's super important because we are the caretakers of our earth, right? So it's our duty as earthlings to protect the environment. Okay, so if we don't protect the environment, we're not going to have an environment in the future. It's our, responsibility to expand the Earth's natural resource base and also to really focus on maintaining and improving soil fertility. Now, right now, we're having an issue with soil fertility because of the way certain crops are harvested and how we're just we're replanting and we're harvesting. And so it's become a huge issue. And so if the soil is not as fertile, then the nutrients that come from the soil are not going to be as dense. So it's really important that we're protecting the environment, or sustainability is really important because it's protecting the environment, it's expanding the Earth's natural resources, and it's maintaining and improving the soil. Without good soil, we really don't have really good production of food. Now, there are an innumerable amount of sources that are working against us as far as promoting a sustainable environment. And one of the biggest forces that's working against us is food production. Okay. So when we think about, the other forces, we're looking at, well, I'll get into that, but focusing on food production, because that's how we reach a nutrient dense diet, we're looking at the environmental cost of what it takes to produce our food. So a lot of these facts are so new to me and they were so interesting. I've heard of global greenhouse gas effect. We know that that is what happens when you have a lot of CO2 or methane or nitric oxide that's released into the air. And what happens is these gases really work to hold the heat onto the earth, so it doesn't allow the heat to release through our atmosphere. And because of the heat that's being held in our atmosphere, it is heating up the earth overall. So kind of like our natural cooling system is not happening. Okay, and so as our planet warms up, we're also more susceptible to the climate change because of the trapping of the heat, and also contributing to, because of the greenhouse gases, more respiratory diseases because of the smog. So we're trapping all of this heat as well as smog onto our earth. Now, 30% of our global greenhouse gases are because of food production. And 15%, so almost half of the greenhouse gases that come from overall food production is coming just from livestock alone. Okay. Now, other costs of food production is it's really taking over 40% of all the land. So when we take away land to grow food, we're also taking away natural habitats of some of our species, and that's going to lead to species going to extinct and going to affect our overall ecosystem. Food production also utilizes 70% of our fresh water. So that's a lot. And a lot of our crops really depend on a huge amount of water. And we'll talk about that a little bit more too when we're trying to decide what plant-based milk is a better choice. Food production is also causing really nutrient overloaded water, so which is causing a lot of the algae and plants to overgrow. So I'm sure that you've probably seen, I think it's called the red algae, at least down here in Florida. So that toxic algae is actually because of a nutrient overload based on eutrophication, which is causing this overgrowth, and it really just suffocates out all of the other marine species that are living below it or near it. So that's not good. So we've got to really work to control that. And because of food production, it's led to a majority of the world fish stocks to be fully fished or overfished. And only 7% of the areas where we're fishing are underfished. So, fish can only produce so quickly. And if we're overly catching and not monitoring that, then we're eventually going to be really, unable to find our fish anymore. And fish are really good for us, but we also need to make sure that they're here for us in the future. So how can we as an individual promote and apply sustainability? Well, the biggest one that we've all heard of throughout the years is recycle, reuse, and reduce. Of course, we know that if we can recycle, we can reuse, and we can reduce our waste, those are the things that are going to help decrease landfill filling up, helping us to not generate more plastics and more of the part of the industry that's really toxic to our environment. We can also eat more plants, okay? So we can focus on increasing our plant proteins like our beans, our lentils, our nuts and seeds. And if we're eating more plants, then we're going to eat less animal products. And remember, the animal products contribute up to, especially the livestock, which is our beef and our chicken, are contributing at least 15% of the global greenhouse emissions just because. Okay, just because of the way they live and what they produce, they're producing the methane gas as well as the CO2. So another thing you can do to promote and apply sustainability is to choose produce grown without pesticides and fertilizers. So going more organic as much as possible. Limiting the processed foods, because just in the process of making processed foods, we're adding more plastics that we're wrapping the foods in. We're adding maybe more chemicals and more steps that we need that take energy. So we're trying to limit those. And really, as from the nutrient side, processed foods aren't that great for us anyways. We can also support local farms, the less that the produce has to travel, using more of the fossil fuels is really good. So trying to visit your local green markets is a nice way something that you can do to promote sustainability. Cooking more and also reducing food waste. All right, so segueing into our second topic, eating with the environment in mind. The environment is a huge concern, right? With global warming and weather changes, the Earth has increased 2 degrees Fahrenheit since the industrial age. So between 1850 and 1900, the Earth's temperature was 2 degrees Fahrenheit lower. And it's progressively increasing in a shorter amount of time. This extra heat is driving regional and seasonal temperature extremes. It's decreasing snow cover, it's increasing sea ice. Last week I had the pleasure of going to Alaska, and Alaska has a few glaciers there. And it was really interesting that they had marked off the area where the glacier used to be 100 years ago, and then where the glacier was just 20 years ago. And then you could see where the glacier is now. And it's kind of scary, our ice caps are melting. Okay. They also, with the temperature changes, we're getting heavy rainfalls. We can see that hurricanes may be increasing as well. And we can see a change of habitat ranges for plants and animals. So 5 crops that are really affected by the environmental changes. These are the top 5, which the first one is coffee. I know I love my coffee every day. And coffee really needs that cool mountainside, tropical, moist, humid weather. And with the global temperatures changing, the heat is really rising. So it's really decreasing that optimal environment for coffee. Peaches are also having issues because of weather. Wheat, weather again, a lot of the heat stress is destroying a lot of the wheat production. Corn needs a lot of rain, and so if it's in the drier areas, which are becoming more and more common, we're not growing as much corn. Almonds also need a lot of water as well. So, the production, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about the plant-based milks next. So plant-based milks are sort of a hot topic right now. I think that you can go to any grocery store and you can see that the whole case is full of just your almond milks, your oat milk, your rice milk, different flavors, different amounts of fat, different amounts of just products, just everywhere made. And why is that happening? I think because there is a large part of our population that is lactose intolerant. And so, or just really don't want to partake in dairy milk. So, it's important too to kind of look at where are these milks coming from and how are they affecting the environment. So right now there's no scientific way to rank milks, like what's the best, which we'll see in a little bit later as far as our dietary patterns. Like we do have a way to rank that, which is kind of cool, but there's no real way to rank the plant-based milks. But we kind of have to, it's a trade-off, right? So if we are more concerned about the water condition on our earth, or if we're more concerned about land use or the greenhouse gas effects, then maybe we can make our decision based on what's most important to us. Like we said about the cows and the livestock producing at least 15% of the greenhouse gas effects in the world, we can see that, okay, well, dairy milk is really gonna, increase greenhouse gas effects. So do I want to drink that? Because that will affect that. Almond and rice milk, so they need a lot of water to produce their milks. If we look at California, out in California, it takes 3.2 gallons of water to produce a single California almond. Also, nuts require less land than oatmeal, but more than rice milk. So it's kind of a trade-off, right? So what is it that we most want to look at? But rice milk does emit more has more effects on the greenhouse gas because of the methane that is emitted from the rice paddies. Avoiding soy and oat milk. So if you're concerned about the land usage, then soy is one of the biggest drivers of deforestation in the Amazon. And 4 cups of soy milk requires 1 square mile of land per year. So that's quite a lot. That seems like a really rapid amount. But although, we're taking away the land, if they're processing it and they're turning over the crops, then the nitrogen that's in the plant is really good in helping make the soil diverse. So that's a trade-off again, too. Hemp, pea, and coconut milks may be the best option when we're looking at, eco-friendly, less water, providing more nitrogen for the soil, less fertilizers. Coconut trees require very little water and are considered natural carbon sinks. So maybe coconut is going to be our saving milk per se for the environment. So eating with the environment in mind, we also want to be mindful of our food waste. Now, our food waste, I thought this was an interesting picture to draw. So 2.5 billion tons of global food is wasted annually. So what that looks like is if you were to line up 23 million 4-ton trucks filled and placed bumper to bumper, it would circle the world 7 times. Okay, so that's a lot of food waste every year. Americans, as the United States, we are the biggest contributors to the food waste, taking up about 40% of the global contribution to food waste. A little bit more broken down here, 325 pounds of waste per year per person. And again, that food waste is also breaking down into methane as it ferments. And so that's also contributing to the greenhouse emissions. So why is there so much food waste in the US? We're 40 million tons a year at least. And, that's kind of hard to swallow. I mean, are we that wasteful of a society? Maybe, but maybe it's just that we don't understand expiration labels. It's possible. Maybe we're overbuying food and we're forgetting about it, and our refrigerators aren't very clean or cleaned out. Maybe they're very cluttered. So we forget about the food and it spoils quickly. We're also not using as much of our leftovers anymore. I mean, I can admit to that. I'm not a huge leftover girl, but my husband is, and it's like, okay, well, what can we do to make that better? Maybe not make as much food at one time, because I know maybe I'll bring it to lunch the next day, but I'm not eat it 2 or 3 days later as well. So maybe I should just make less. Also, a big contributor to food waste is overbuying. I know sometimes it can be more economically feasible to go to a Costco or Sam's and buy in bulk. And then we have so much food, or we have a big family and we feel like we really have to overbuy our food. And then we tend to overcook. And if we're not eating the leftovers, then we're contributing to more food waste. So what could be done to reduce food waste? So there are 3 things. We could compost more. We could talk about changing the laws. And we could also talk about what we can do as individuals as well, and being a little more mindful about our food. So what is composting? So composting is a great way to reduce waste and support sustainability. So it is a process in which the organic matter, such as leaves and food scraps, break down and decomposes in the soil. Usually takes about 3 months to make a really good compost, to get everything where it's really broken down and it makes a beautiful nutrient dense soil. It's pretty incredible. Now, if you've never composted before and you're not quite sure where to get started, or maybe you don't feel like doing that in your house, here in Boca Raton, we do have a community garden, and they have 3 big barrels that they provide for composting. So you can bring your food scraps there, and they'll spin it, and it'll just be contributing to the community composting pile. You can also compost at home. There's some examples there that on the bottom of some ones that will, the second the 2 on the right are ones that you put in your yard. The first one, it depends on how big it is. I know that my husband bought a ceramic one that we could put on our countertop. And I had never composted before, but we got these barrels installed at the community garden back in January. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. I am going to start composting, or at least collecting my food scraps, and then I'm going to take it to the composting bins. Well, it was a great idea in theory. For the first couple of weeks, I would take it, and if I wasn't, the problem is if you're not timely in getting your food scraps over to the composting barrels, they do start to smell. So when it started to smell, I cleaned it out, I put it in the garage, and I thought, okay, well, I can stand it if the composting ceramic bin is in the garage. Well, then I went on vacation and I forgot about it and I left some food scraps, and all of a sudden we had this infestation of fruit flies and we couldn't figure out where they were coming from. And I went to the garage and I totally lifted up the top and there was just swarming with fruit flies. So those are things you don't want to do. And you really want to pay attention to your composting if you're going to do it at home, and just be timely enough to either get it outside your backyard or take it over to the composting bins at the Susan Wetchell Community Garden. Now, if you're like to be politically active, you can look into what other states have done as far as changing laws. You know, states like Vermont, California, and Colorado, and Tennessee, like they all have really interesting programs that they've incorporated into their communities. I think my favorite is Vermont's universal recycling law. So it bans food scraps and waste entirely. And as a result, they've been able to donate more food to the food banks, which I thought was a fantastic outcome. And it's really forcing people to become more mindful about the food before they waste it. California, Colorado, Massachusetts are working on programs to really promote composting and organic collection programs, just like the one we have here in Boca Raton. Although it's small, it is mighty. Tennessee and Washington and other cities are really, creating a food waste task force, different things going on in New York and Maine. And the US Department of Agriculture and the US EPA have a goal that they set a goal in 2015 to reduce food waste by half by 2030. So I didn't dive into that actual document, but I think it would be interesting to explore and see what their strategies are moving forward. As an individual, what can you do for mindful food practices? Well, starting with shopping, shopping smart, smaller, more frequent grocery store trips instead of buying bulk in order to reduce our waste. Keeping your fridge clutter-free. I'm guilty of this. I'll, revisit my fridge maybe once a month. And, as far as making it clutter-free, but then you really have a good idea of what's going on in your fridge. And if you have those leftovers or you have those strawberries that are about to spoil, you'll see it much quicker. Saving your leftovers, most leftovers can be kept for up to 3 to 4 days. There are some, safety handling charts that are available online. So if you really are concerned about the leftover and how long you should keep it, the general rule is if you're not going to eat it within 4 days, that you go ahead and put it in the freezer. And most things you can store up to 3 months. Some things are a little bit different, but you can look at those charts that are online and it'll guide you a little bit better. Also, just some other tips, really storing our food correctly so that we can avoid some of the food waste. Some of our fruits and vegetables, they produce the ethylene gas, which causes those fruits and vegetables to ripen quicker. And if they're sitting around other fruits and vegetables that don't produce the gas, but do ripen, it'll ripen those. It'll promote ripening in those foods, and then we can't eat it fast enough, right? If it's ripening too quickly. So make sure and store those foods that are listed here. So your bananas, your avocados, tomatoes, cantaloupe, peaches, pears, green onions. Make sure and store those separately from all your other produce if possible. And this was interesting too. So your fruits and vegetables like potatoes, tomatoes, garlic, cucumber, and onions, they should never be refrigerated. So you should always store these food items at room temperature. So I thought that was really cool. So it's all about how we're storing foods, and that's going to help us be more mindful. So Beyond the Table. Now, Beyond the Table is our theme, as I've mentioned before, for National Nutrition Month. So this is a month-long celebration that is spearheaded by the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, which as registered dietitians, we are all a part of. And it brings attention to different themes every year. And I think that this theme is super timely because we are all looking at the effects of the environment and we're concerned. So, what can we do to keep the momentum going? So also interesting, in addition to it being National Nutrition Month, on March 19th, it was World Agricultural Day. And this particular article was actually posted on one of my sites. And I thought, oh my gosh, how timely. Like my whole project or my whole presentation is on food sustainability. And so this abstract was basically comparing. So it was based on the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey that was taken between 2013 and 2016. They had over 4,000 participants. So what they were doing is they were looking at the diet pattern. So they were saying, okay, what sort of diet or lifestyle are people following? These particular 4,000 people that participated. And they were evaluating or comparing the data based on the greenhouse gas emissions, the diet quality, which is based on the Healthy Eating Index of 2015, and also the cost. So looking at food prices and really trying to kind of quantify and look at maybe what's a little bit better for the environment, or maybe, this is where it comes to where you have to go what your trade-off is. Maybe it doesn't matter that, the environment, but you can really only focus on the cost of food nowadays. So, but you can look at the cost and maybe make a little bit of an exception because you know that what you're purchasing is more nutrient dense, but also not releasing as much of the greenhouse gas emissions. So it's sort of a trade-off, okay, when it comes to sustainability. So I want to kind of briefly go over the diet patterns because I think it's really interesting. The plant-based diet pattern is actually really good, intermediate diet quality. So we're looking at mainly, so less than 1 ounce of equivalent of a meat product. So probably the majority of the plant-based diet patterns are going to be your vegetarians. So your vegetarians, they do sometimes incorporate eggs or dairy products. So that being said, their diet quality is intermediate, which is good. And then their greenhouse gas emissions are the lowest because we're not incorporating any of the livestock. And the cost is typically the lowest as well. If we think about beans and the cost of lentils, like that's typically pretty low. And that would be one of your main protein sources in a plant-based diet, especially if you didn't do eggs or dairy. The diet pattern low grain, so this is consistent of less than 25% of total grain. So the calories in your diet, less than 25% of the calories in your diet are considered grain. So that's going to be your rice, your wheat, your pastas, things like that, your breads. Diet quality intermediate, it's kind of an intermediate across the board. Restricted carbohydrates, so that's when less than 45% of your calories come from carbohydrates. Typically, we say less than 50%. Carbohydrates, low grain or grains are considered part of carbohydrates. So carbohydrates sort of are macronutrient versus a grain would just be one of the products as part of a carbohydrate. So restricted carbohydrate have the highest cost. So if we're restricting the carbs, then we're eating more protein and we're eating more fat. And depending on what kind of fat it is, if it's saturated fat, then we're eating more animal products. So the cost is highest, the greenhouse gas emissions are moderate to highest, and the diet quality is okay. Low fat, that's when we're consuming less than 30% of our calories from fat. Now, it didn't say whether it was good fat or bad fat. So when we talk about saturated fat being the bad fat, that's going to come mainly from your animal sources, or your polyunsaturated fats and your monounsaturated fats. Those are your good fats. So those are more plant-based. So that's why I think this isn't okay, because the diet quality is the highest. So that's why I'm thinking that it's low fat and definitely low in saturated fat. And then time restricted, that's when you're going to look at those intermittent fasting diets. So those typically have the lowest diet quality, because when you're restricting the time that you eat, you're really typically not focusing on the nutrients. You're just focusing on, oh, okay, I can have this and this and this within my 6 hour window. So typically there's not a lot of focus on the nutrients. And the greenhouse gas emissions, intermediate, and cost can be low because we're really not eating as much on an intermittent fasting diet or lifestyle. So this is where I like to change it up just a little bit and add, of course, you don't have to answer, but just kind of mentally think about in your head what you think the 3 crops that we currently provide more than 50% of the world's calories. So I'll give you a second to look at it. I kind of put a cheat sheet on the bottom, or cheat pictures on the bottom. If you look at the bottom, you'll see maize is on the left, rice is in the middle, and wheat is on the far right. So those are the 3 crops that currently feed 50%, basically 50% of the calories, the world's calories. That's what we depend on: the maize, the rice, and the wheat. So I think that's really interesting. And especially when we look at there are really only 9 crops that currently feed the world. So the maize, plantains, potatoes, rice, sorghum, soybeans, sweet potatoes, and wheat. Now, what I find most interesting about this fact is that a long time ago, over hundreds and thousands of years, at one point, there were 6,000 plant species that humans have eaten over time. And now we've sort of dwindled that down, or funneled it down to 9 crops that are really feeding the world. So we have to think about that, and we have to ask ourselves as well. So do we have what we need now? So the big sustainability question: do we have what we need now? And is this going to be sustainable for our future? Because we've already dwindled down from so many options. Is it going to keep dwindling down if we don't take care of our environment and the needs of our lifestyles? I don't know. It's going to be one of those thought-provoking questions that's going to take us a while to really figure out, I think. But if any of you guys aren't familiar with the cassava, a lot of the gluten-free products that are available in the market, they usually have the cassava starch that makes it up instead of including the wheat. Because usually the wheat is what is not tolerated on the gluten-free diets. So and that's what it looks like there on the bottom. So looking at that diversity, how we dwindle down from 6,000 different plants to 9. We also there was another study that I pulled up that looked at China, South Korea, and the Maldives, and how their diets have changed. Now we can look at our diets as Americans and see that we have incorporated more processed foods, less fruits and vegetables. We can see that trend as well. But when we look at countries that were really dependent mainly on plant-based diets, we see the change. And I think it's so interesting to see that in mainland China, sweet potatoes, they used to be the key staple in the 1960s. And now they've decreased significantly, and they're actually no longer a part of their diet. But what has increased are more of the Western Hemisphere type foods: the eggs and the pork and the wheat, because we produce a lot of wheat. South Korea, barley used to account for a large amount of their calorie consumption, and now it's also vanished as well. The same thing for coconuts with the Maldives. It's really become a really small part of their diet. And, it's so interesting to see these trends and what changes and how does that affect their culture and their nutrition. Because we know that sweet potatoes are way better for us than maybe some of the pork and I mean eggs to some extent. I do like eggs. And wheat to some extent. It's all about a balance, but those sweet potatoes really offered a lot of nutrients that you're not going to find in the other foods. So seeing these changes and seeing the results too, as far as how their chronic diseases have risen, what's going on, and it really is going to make us look harder, or hopefully provoke the conversation to help us look closer at what we're eating and what we're doing to our environment in order to promote sustainability. My last topic I'm going to briefly dive into is our gardening. So, I can't say enough about gardening. I have so many people that approach me and tell me that they can't garden. They have a black thumb or whatever. And honestly, I have tried so many times throughout the years to plant different things, to teach the kids, or we started gardens at schools. And, it's always been, I haven't always been successful, I guess, but I kept trying. And that's the deal, is it's just really being committed to the fact that you want to grow your own foods, and then just keep trying different things. We do have a couple of plots at the community garden, and we have been able to, grow a really nice harvest. And I'll kind of brag on that in the next slide. But what are the benefits of gardening? So outdoor gardening can help promote vitamin D, can make vitamin D because you're out in the sun, okay? And vitamin D has been linked to lowering your risk of chronic disease and dementia. Gardening is also an exercise, and this is how I promote it to all my lady friends. We will go and we will garden and we will burn calories, because you can burn up to 300 calories in an hour. And you can get really sore if you really are gardening for a long period of time. You move all sorts of muscles that you may not realize are there. Gardening will also help improve mood and lower depression. I usually stop at our garden Tuesdays and Friday mornings on my way into work, because our garden is located less than 2 miles away from Lynn Cancer. And my mood is so much more improved just by being outside for that 20, 30 minutes, walking around the garden, looking at the beautiful colors of flowers or other plots harvests, and then picking our own harvest if we do have some available. Family and community gardens help to foster connections. I have met so many people in our community garden, and they're just really calm, just really nice, like, people. And they all care about one thing, and that's just promoting health through gardening. And gardening can also give you that sense of agency empowerment. And I can't tell you how excited I am whenever we do have tomatoes and green peppers and kale and other types of lettuce that we've harvested just from our little plot alone. So you can see pictures on the left. That's one of our plots. We actually won an award for most decorated plot around Christmas time. So that was kind of exciting. And then that bag of produce, that was about 4 pounds of produce that we donated to Boca Helping Hands. That's part of the requirement for the community garden, is that you do donate about 10% of your proceeds or your harvest to Boca Helping Hands, which is just beautiful that we can give back to a food bank of fresh produce. The gardening in the community. So like I said before, so we do have a community garden, and it is less than 2 miles from Lynn Cancer. Or maybe think about starting a garden at home. What is the benefit of a raised bed versus in the ground? So raised beds really offer you more control. So you have more control over the soil, you have more control of how much watering, but it can be a little bit more costly, because then you have to put in the timers and the hose, and you just have to really be more mindful of what's going on. Now, if you have an in-ground garden, it can be less expensive, but then unless you get your soil tested, you're not going to have a really good idea of what's going to grow in your soil. And it's hard to add nutrients to the soil unless you're really maybe doing a lot of composting and really kind of playing with the different pHs and then just the consistency of the soil. But that takes a lot of work and a lot of time. So just those are things that if you have that opportunity and that's really all you have and that's what you want to focus on, then there are some, benefits to that type of gardening as well. And that wraps up my presentation. If you are a patient at LCI within the last year, please join us for our cooking demonstrations. We will be doing earth-friendly cooking on Tuesday, April 9th. And it is an in-person, and we are looking to put it on Zoom as well. This is for our patients only and caregivers. If you have a caregiver that wants to come along with you, that's okay too. Our Soup to Nuns is our monthly nutrition and cancer support group. So we meet once a month and we cover a nutrition related topic and leave the floor open to any questions that may pop up and you have kind of like a one-on-one opportunity with the dietitian. And both of those you need to RSVP to the number above. If you have individual questions for me, Brandy, you can always email me or call me. And I'm not sure if we have any questions, but if you guys do, let me know.
You covered so much. I think we have a lot to digest. Actually, I got chills with a lot of those all the research you did and the stats and just the effect on our world. It's thank you for sharing that. It's really thought-provoking and kind of makes us want to change a little bit of the habits that we have now. So thank you, Brandy.
I agree. You're welcome.
And
Thank you, Jan.
I want everyone to know that this lecture was recorded. So if you would like to look at it again and get some of the information, I actually took my phone and took some screenshots of some of the slides. But or if you'd like to share it with someone in your coworkers or family or friends, just give us a call, and Lee, when she sends out the evaluations, she can send you the link to this lecture. And speaking of the evaluations, we appreciate all the input that you can give us on the evaluations. And if you have any ideas or suggestions, we read all of them. So we appreciate that as well. And as always, we want to thank you for coming today and let you know that during the month of April at the Lynn Cancer Institute, we're going to be focusing on two things: advanced directives and also head and neck cancers. We probably will not have a lecture on the head and neck cancers, but we will have information here at the Lynn Cancer Institute. And on April 24th, we will have our next in our monthly series on nutrition. And that topic will be eco-friendly eating, which might be a little adjunct to what we learned today. And our speaker will be our other clinical dietitian, Katie Wolke. And that will also be at 11:30 in the morning. So on April 24th. So thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you in April. Have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.